This is a story of a 17-year-old girl who disappeared under mysterious circumstances. She was going to hitch a ride to the city, and no one saw her afterwards. Her mother began to receive blood-curdling night calls right after that, in which an unidentified man kept calling her daughter his slave. But everything actually turned out to be much more complicated. In this video, we'll be trying to make sense of what happened to Amy Billig. Amy Billig was born on January 9, 1957, in the neighborhood in Miami called Coconut Grove. This place is the epitome of a southern state. The bright sun, palm trees, and the vastness of the ocean create the impression of a happy and carefree life. When you're enjoying all this nature, it's easy to forget that danger can await you at every corner. On March 5, 1974, a 17-year-old girl, Amy, was going home from school to have a snack. After that, she was planning to meet up with her friends. The girl called her father to ask him for some pocket money. After eating her lunch, she headed to her father's workplace. To get to his office, she needed to hitch a ride there. This decision turned out to be ill-fated. She never got to her father's workplace, and no one saw her after that. After a while, her parents started to worry that something bad might have happened to their daughter. She didn't come home that day, and her parents went to the police. The police immediately started searching for her, scouring the places she might have passed on the way from her house to her father's workplace. But they didn't manage to find any evidence that could possibly shed light on her disappearance. Several days passed after her disappearance, and her parents were contacted by 16-year-old brothers Charles and Larry Glasser. They claimed to have kidnapped Amy and demanded a $30,000 ransom. The police quickly got involved, arrested the brothers, and found out that the young criminals were just trying to profit from other people's grief. They had nothing to do with Amy's disappearance, but were put on trial for extortion. Following Amy's disappearance, her mother Susan received a disturbing call. An unidentified man told the woman that her daughter became his slave. The police obviously tried to trace the call, but it was simply impossible because the man used a payphone. Despite this fact, the story about a mysterious call will have its continuation, but we'll talk about everything in its right order. In the meantime, Amy's camera was found near the Florida highway. The majority of the photos were overexposed, and the good ones didn't provide any valuable information that could help the search. When the police were looking for clues, Amy's mother couldn't just sit around and do nothing and started her own investigation. 12 days after her daughter's disappearance, she got a bit of a clue. She was told that Amy might have been kidnapped by the biker gang called the Outlaws. These people traveled the country and were involved in all sorts of illegal activities. The mother found out that some of the members of this gang actually did pass by Coconut Grove the day Amy disappeared. Let's remember that the girl was planning to hitch a ride on the freeway, and there was a high chance that these bikers were in that area as well. Susan asked one of her acquaintances for help, the one who used to be a legal representative of this gang. He managed to organize a meeting with two members of the Outlaws. They both said that they knew nothing about Amy's disappearance, but added one bone-chilling detail. They admitted that in the past, some members of the gang kidnapped a young girl and sold her into slavery. The bikers added that this horrendous activity wasn't all that rare in their criminal circles. The kidnapped girls could be exchanged for bikes, credit cards, and other things. The bikers Susan met promised her to find out more information through other gang members, but it was impossible to contact them afterwards. They were either worried that further disclosure of sensitive information regarding the gang's activities would cause serious problems for them, or these problems caught up with them right after their meeting with the mother of the kidnapped girl. Later, Susan contacted the woman who was kept in captivity by the bikers for 5 years. She was kidnapped when she was 12, and she only managed to escape at 17. During this conversation, Susan became even more convinced that the members of this gang could really be involved in the disappearance of her daughter, but she didn't get any further clues. 3 months passed after Amy's disappearance, and all this time her mother kept looking for clues. She managed to find out that the members of the Outlaws gang were in Orlando, which was 155 miles away from Coconut Grove. Without a second thought, she headed there and started asking around, approaching dozens of people who could potentially know something. One time, she got a valuable clue. A cashier of a small convenience store looked at Amy's photo and said that she saw her in the company of at least 2 bikers. He added that the girl bought only vegetarian soup, and this information became critical for her. Amy was a vegetarian, and the cashier's words were all the proof the mother needed to be sure her daughter was still alive. Alas, this information didn't help her to track down her daughter, and the search process slowed down again. A year and a half passed after that moment before Susan received new information about the possible fate of her daughter. On January 9, 1976, she was contacted by a biker named Dave after he saw Amy's photo in a newspaper. He said that the girl belonged to him for a while and agreed to meet up with Susan in his house. The man was visibly nervous, but was still able to share some details. According to him, he bought Amy from another biker, and she lived with him for a while. Then Dave sold her to a different biker. It's hard to believe that we're talking about an actual human being right now, but this is exactly what Dave shared. To prove that he was telling the truth, he mentioned a scar on Amy's body, the one Susan never talked about publicly. Dave added that the girl was very quiet. The biker said that he might have a clue about who might be keeping Amy at the moment and promised Susan to try to contact that person. After 2 weeks, he called the woman and told her that he found out her daughter's location. According to Dave, Amy was in the city of Tulsa, Oklahoma. It was almost halfway across the country from Miami. He promised Susan to help her with her search, agreeing to meet her there. It's not entirely clear what motivated the person who kept the kidnapped girl as his slave. It could be that he was scared he'd face a serious jail time, or maybe he simply felt guilty. Dave and Susan met up in Tulsa and went to one of the local bars. According to Dave, Amy was supposed to be brought there. Alas, it never happened. A fight broke out while they were waiting, and Dave was injured. Other bikers led Susan out of the bar and put her in a taxi. She never saw Dave after that. However, the man later contacted her lawyer and said that Amy might be in Seattle. In 1977, Susan suffered a heart attack, but several months later headed to Seattle to continue searching for her daughter. She visited local tattoo parlors, biker shops, and bars. Some people recognized Amy from the photo and told her that they saw her. They also described the girl as very quiet and shy, which coincided with Dave's words. Alas, all of this didn't bring the mother closer to finding her daughter. Almost 2 years later, in winter 1979, Susan received a call from an unknown man. He said that Amy was at the truck stop near the city of Reno, Nevada. The caller added that the girl required urgent help. Susan immediately gave this information to the FBI, but they weren't able to locate Amy. Despite this, they found out that some biker gang actually did stay at that place, but it was unclear if the kidnapped girl was there with them. After that, there were no clues at all. All of Susan's attempts to find her daughter didn't bring her any closer to the truth. Nothing changed till 1992, when the woman contacted 2 private detectives. They told her that they found a man who offered them to buy a quiet and withdrawn girl. He didn't show any photos and later disappeared, once again leaving Susan with no valuable clues. Amy's father died from cancer that same year. In December 1997, an ex-member of the Outlaws gang, Paul Branch, was on his deathbed and allegedly admitted to killing Amy. According to him, he and some of the other members of the gang kidnapped the girl, and hours later, she was already dead. This story seems suspicious because the only person who heard it was Paul's wife. Susan thought the woman made it up for money and publicity. But let's go back 2 years. Remember that call Susan received right after Amy's disappearance? The man said that the girl was with him and became his slave. She received calls like that on a regular basis for 20 years. He called the poor woman at night and told her about all the horrendous things he was doing to her daughter. This continued till 1995. That's when the man made a mistake. Instead of using a payphone, he used a mobile phone, and the FBI immediately identified him. It turned out to be Henry Johnson Blair, who worked for the U.S. Customs Department. The man was arrested, but he denied any involvement in Amy's disappearance. Blair said that he harassed Susan with his calls for 20 years because he was an alcoholic and had an obsessive-compulsive disorder. This didn't sound very believable, but the police couldn't find anything that could show his involvement with the girl. At least not directly. There was a photo of a white van on Amy's camera that was found after her disappearance. Blair had a van of the same model in color. But that's not the most interesting information. Amy wrote in her diary that she talked to a man named Hank. He promised to take her to South America, and Blair actually went there for work. And finally, his nickname was Hank. Despite the plethora of coincidences, the police couldn't find any real evidence against him. In the end, he was sentenced to just 2 years of prison for harassing Susan with his calls. What do we have in the end? There are 2 versions of Amy's disappearance. She was either kidnapped by the bikers or by Blair. There are massive clues supporting both theories, but there's still no hard evidence. The FBI views Blair as the main suspect. It remains unknown what he could possibly do to Amy. If he wasn't lying and actually kept the girl in captivity all that time, what happened to her after he got arrested? And if we assume that the gang of bikers is to blame, we have even more questions. Was Amy actually killed right after they kidnapped her, or did they bring her with them everywhere they went, passing her from one owner to the other? Despite Susan's tremendous efforts and all the extensive work she conducted, she'll never have any answers to these questions. The woman died in 2005 when she was 80 years old. Even after suffering a heart attack, she didn't give up and kept searching for her child till the very end. Maybe someday the world will know the truth, and all her efforts will not have been in vain.